I'll get started. So I'm going to be talking about the trip I just took at the beginning of November to Honduras. This was partially sponsored by the Dine Cares initiative. They paid for some of my travel expenses and then also gave me some time off to do it. So to get started, I went with a nonprofit group. It's based out of the Upper Valley area of New Hampshire and Vermont, and they've been working in this area in El Rosario, Honduras, since '86, so almost past 30 years. And they started out, and you can see in the bottom here, this is back in '86. They went there pretty much with some tents and wanted to help out the community. And since then, they've been doing a lot of community development work, working with El Rosario and the surrounding area, implementing a variety of different projects. A lot of the volunteers are medical professionals, so doctors and nurses. So they've set up a medical clinic down there, and that's where we stay, which I'll get to in a second. And let's see. So these trips that we go on, it's myself. I pretty much work on the technology portion of things, but then other people on this trip, there were 6 or 7 of us total. There were 3 or 4 doctors, a physician assistant, a veterinarian, someone that worked on bookkeeping and translator, some other people that just focus on community development. So there's a lot of projects that go on. During this trip, we had a dental team come from the city, and there were probably a dozen dental students that came in. We had a cervical cancer screening clinic. One of the doctors performed during the day, and like blood pressure screenings. There was some emergency veterinary care for some animals that got hurt while we were down there, and other sessions about pesticide use and lots of different things. But what I focused on and what I'm going to be talking about is mainly created down there, installing some computers and a wireless network for educational content. So to give an overview of where Honduras is and some of the logistics when we go down there, we stay in San Pedro, which doesn't show up on this map, but it's right over here. And we work in the Euro district, so out here in the mountainous area. When we go down, we stay at a hotel in San Pedro the first night and the last night, eat like standard restaurant. Everything's pretty Americanized down there. And we get groceries for 2 weeks that usually always last less than a week. And no matter how much we get, it's a lot of beans and rice over and over again. And we bring it out to El Rosario, which is where we're staying. It's main estimates from 500 to 900 people live there, depending on who you ask. It's a mainly agricultural community, so they farm beans and corn. They're working on yucca farms, and there are some coffee groves. So mainly agriculture. There's a lot of farm animals always wandering around. There's a donkey on a stick in this picture. They do that with their pigs a lot down there. So the pigs won't go under the barbed wire fence. The stick will get caught and they won't be able to escape. This is the only donkey I've ever seen with a stick on it. It was wandering around downtown. Apparently it gets into trouble a lot. So this is, and in the bottom you can see their corn crop has already been for the next few months. Those will be growing. So when we go down, Axe is kind of transformed from staying in tents to staying in a bunkhouse with a medical clinic. So there are 2 main buildings in this compound with a smaller and other, like a latrine. So this is typical food that we have people cook for us. Pretty much every meal. Every now and then the beans will be changed out with eggs. And sometimes instead of spaghetti, there'll be like plantains. But usually rice, spaghetti over and over again. And let's see. So this is a basic stove that's pretty common in the area. I've seen 1 or 2 propane stoves down there, but they aren't very. Normally it's wood burning stoves that are pretty much made out of adobe. And we have, when we go down, we pretty much bring 2 changes of clothes, and Doña Chica up here washes them every day for us. And she's getting old, but she's still pretty awesome. She lives next door, and she comes over. Her and her dogs come over and hang out all day. And let's see. And then the standard bunkhouse, they're bunk beds. We can probably hold about 11 people in the bunkhouse and clinic. 11 to 15 people can stay there, depending on how crammed you want to be. So bring sleeping bags and spray those with permethrin before, and keep bugs out at night. I had a nice little spider stay with me most of the nights, just on the wall next to my bed. I was hoping that it was eating most of the other bugs, so I didn't really kill it. So what I went down to focus on was the education center. It was created from, there's a building there already. It was the old school that they outgrew, so they remodeled and did some construction work back in 2008. And there's one small room that has a library in it, and then another community meeting space. You can see in the bottom here, this is one of the computers that they had installed a few years back. It's an old Apple, like G4, G5, whatever those were, powered PCs, which has since died. They were having common problems like that, of bringing down old computers that were donated mostly from Dartmouth, and they just kind of, they slowly die. No one has any way to service them, and so they, Dean Siebert, who's a doctor that's been going down for about 20 years, the library is actually named after him. He's a Dartmouth faculty member from the med school. He asked me if I could come down and help on the education center. Now, I originally met him when I was working with Engineers Without Borders at Northeastern University. So when I was there, back in 2005 or 2006, I initially met Dean, and he asked if we could help one of the nearby villages with a water project. So we worked on gravity-fed water distribution systems in probably 5 or 6 communities. We started in one community, and then from there are a bunch of other communities that had this need where they didn't have clean water, they didn't have working taps, they would go to a stream to get their water. So we worked with them on those projects, and that's kind of where I got involved with ACTS originally. And Dean has kind of we've stayed in touch, and was having obvious issues with the technology there. And since a lot of the people that volunteer are old retired doctors, they don't have a lot of expertise servicing computers. So that's kind of where I came in to help them out. Before I went down, I looked at what other people have been doing, and looked at some of these case studies of community wireless networks and educational content that isn't connected to the internet. There's electricity in El Rosario, but there's no internet connection. There's actually, just in the past year or so, there's satellite TV, so they can get HBO, but they can't get other things. So kind of wanted to look at what was already done and try not to reinvent things. So there are a few different mesh networks that I found that they're community installed and community operated. And they host things like Wikipedia and other content that the community kind of drives. And then a lot of it uses firmware by open source firmware to make regular routers work as mesh networks. And then some additional was the Rachel Initiative, which is it's organized by a nonprofit called World Possible. But basically what it is it's loading rich educational content onto a small device like a USB drive or a Raspberry Pi in this case. So there's Khan Academy videos, Wikipedia, other local content that is of use to people without an internet connection, with the idea that it can be used at a library or someplace that doesn't have very good internet access. So I looked at all those and did some planning. I also read, I have a copy of this, wireless networking for the developing world or in the developing worlds, which it's pretty basic, but it has some good ideas of things that you might overlook normally. I also got a few copies of that in Spanish and brought that down with me for anyone that might be interested in the village to continue working on this. And with all that, I put together a master plan for the network itself, which kind of looks at, focuses on these Raspberry Pi Rachel servers. So basically some educational content at the library is the first phase, followed by expanding the network to include the other schools and the medical clinic in El Rosario is in the second phase. And during that second phase, also looking into how we can connect the whole thing to the internet. And then in the third, expanding this from El Rosario to the surrounding communities and have a network of multiple communities. So that's kind of the 5-year plan of where we're trying to go with all of this. But some of the things before I even got to that that I need to look at were what kind of devices they might want to use. So right now I've brought down a few laptops and I'm asking the librarian who's kind of in charge of all of this to keep track of what kids are using, what different people are using, if they find that they have more issues with laptops versus tablets, to see what we want to invest in the future. And then one of the things I was hoping to deploy down there was a brick, which is created by a group in Kenya. It's considered a wireless router for the developing world. It has a battery backup in it, and it can repeat a GSM, a cell network data connection, or Wi-Fi internet connection. And you can just kind of, it's the size of a brick, and just kind of deploy it anywhere, supposedly. But I had a lot of issues trying to get it working in the States. And then as I was troubleshooting it more and more, I found some flaky code in there. So I'm waiting for the next version of that before I deploy anything down there. I ended up going with some more enterprise level networking equipment that I'll get into in a moment for the deployment. And then a Raspberry Pi with a 64 gigabyte, excuse me, SD card that has the Rachel educational content. So this is the overall design that I kind of came up with. It's fairly basic. Basically, there's a Raspberry Pi in one port and then an access point in the other. In the future, we'll have another port extend. This is what's installed in the library currently. So we'll want to extend from the library down to the rest of the community with another antenna, and then have a third antenna pointed towards the internet. There are some wireless ISPs in the area that may eventually work into this area. So we may need to get some repeaters to eventually get it down into there. But this allows the local community to go to the library and pretty much anywhere around the library, so the downtown area, and connect wirelessly to the educational content and view that. One of the issues that I did have with this device was that the router only ships with a 24 volt power supply, and this access point is a 48 volts. So power over Ethernet. To avoid having to plug it into another wall outlet, I had to get a separate power supply that took a few extra days and just some more time to get everything working together. But I was able to install a bind server, so there's DNS working on here, so they don't have to remember the IP address of the site that they want to go to. I set up a few CNAMEs that redirect to the Raspberry Pi, just basic DHCP to make sure that the Raspberry Pi was on a static IP address. And then other than that, it was pretty straightforward. And there's also an open VPN server running on it, so when it does have internet access, we can log into it remotely and modify things and check on different services, because right now it's kind of running without any monitoring. What's up, Matt?
Is that Wikipedia editable?
Is editable, but it's basically an archived copy that they archive every year in Spanish. I'd have to check. I'm not 100% sure if you can edit that or if it's just static content. So surprisingly, there's Radio Shack in San Pedro Sula. So that's where we ended up buying stores at this mall that was surprisingly big mall. There was a Taekwondo match in the middle of the mall. It was like a Sunday when we were there. It was Costa Rica versus Honduras. Everyone was there watching it. There was a Ferris wheel in the mall. It was just kind of crazy how much stuff there was. But one thing I learned from buying 4 computers in Honduras is that you should call your credit card company before you make a $1,500 purchase in Honduras. That takes a while to get through that roadblock if you don't do that. So it was denied. The purchase was denied. If you use the sales guy's phone to call my credit card company to get it approved. In the middle of that, he ran out of minutes on his phone because everything's prepaid down there. So we had to go to the cell phone store and get more minutes for his phone. It was a long process of trying to get this thing approved. And then the next store I went to, I got denied again. Apparently my cell phone or my credit card company didn't put a note when they approved this purchase that I was still in Honduras at the time. So I needed to call again when I got back to the hotel. But using Google Voice to call from a hotel is free and didn't use any minutes. So that worked pretty easy. So we ended up buying 4 computers. They were only about $370 a piece. So we looked at a few different options. A lot of them, they tried to sell you on Windows. This one actually had Ubuntu pre-installed on it, which probably saves some on the price. But it's just 4 gigs of RAM and 500 gigabyte hard drive, 15-inch laptop. So pretty standard HP laptops. And then I'd already brought down 2 tablets. The one that was the company gift a few years back, and then one laptop per child XO tablets, which is designed specifically for children, and you can put it into Spanish pretty easily, and it has a lot of educational games on it. And on the tablets, I preloaded an application called Kiwix, which allows you to compress and archive copies of Wikipedia. So those, even if the Raspberry Pi dies, you can still use the tablets to get to Wikipedia. And we brought these computers back to El Rosario, bought them, and I installed Edge Ubuntu instead of just this base Ubuntu, which has some educational content on it, pre-installed and some other things.
Did you install any other apps on the tablets?
No, the only app that I installed on the tablets was Kiwix. The XO tablet had a bunch of stuff on it already, and I actually ended up using the parental controls on that to block a bunch of the apps because most of them required internet access, and a lot of them, even though you put it in a Spanish mode, were still in English. So it was a poor implementation of doing the multiple languages. I kind of went through all the apps and tried to figure out what someone could figure out how to use, but I didn't put anything else on the Nexus 7s that we got a few years back. I didn't put anything other than Kiwix on there. I wasn't really sure what else I should put on there, but hopefully they'll keep track of how much each of those are being used, or if they're being used at all. The Nexus 7 that I brought down with Wikipedia on it, the librarian, that would probably be better for an older kid that might be going to the library, as opposed to the young kids that want to use the XO, which is more geared towards like 5 to 10-year-olds. The other tablet might be good for a student doing research on a project that just needs Wikipedia. And with that, they can also get to the Raspberry Pi server that has Khan Academy videos and some other things that they could view.
Was the Nexus tablet running Jelly Bean or KitKat?
I updated it right before I went in, so whatever the latest one was. So as of the end of October, forget.
Yeah, like 4.3 or something.
Yeah. Oops. Yeah. So after I got everything installed, there was a kid watching me for part of it. His name's Johnny. Playing. He wanted to play with one of the tablets, so I gave that to him for a few days before I brought it up to the library, which was good because it kept him quiet. He was kind of a rambunctious kid, but it also meant every time he saw me, he wanted to borrow the tablet. Even after I brought it to the library, for like the week after I brought it to the library, he kept asking me for this tablet that I didn't have anymore. I think eventually I did see him up at the library, pestering the librarian for it. So I'm glad I could share that with her. Yeah, and a lot of the other equipment that I got ready, there's a back room in the clinic that's used to be used as a lab space. The table that we used also has stirrups on it for exams, and I had to clear out of there one of the days when the doctors were busy. they needed to use it as a patient table. But that's pretty much where everything, we got everything ready and just showed it to some of the community members before we installed it in the library. So here's a picture of the box that everything's installed in. They made a little box to put it all in. I told them that they probably shouldn't just leave it out. So within a day, they had the local carpenter build this box to put the router and the Raspberry Pi in. And then we did some training with them, with the librarian here, Ladani. And then, so Ladani and Nelson, who's the head of one of the committees, I forget which one, that's kind of in charge of the network in the library. So basic training on if the lights aren't on, check the cables. And I left extra Raspberry Pi, so if the lights on the Raspberry Pi aren't on, just take out these cables, put in this other backup Raspberry Pi that has another SD card. But nothing really much more than that, other than, turn it off and turn it back on again. So that's something that in the future I'd like to do more of and do more training. Something else that we worked with the community on was, this was a group, the education committee, and a few other people that are interested in keeping the network alive and keeping educational content available. So there are a few librarians here and teachers and just local community members. So I talked to them about what we installed before we told the whole community about it, and different ways to troubleshoot it, and that could be used down the road, but then asked for their input and asked them to put together a document of what they really wanted. So basically, they just want help expanding this network throughout the community and eventually getting connected to the internet. And one of the guys wanted help installing antivirus on all the systems. So, and so we had a community day where this was a piece of the community day. One of the doctors, he is a doctor part-time of the year in Alaska, and he's done some other work at the South Pole. So he shared pictures of penguins and ice, and which is a novel concept to a lot of people down there. And then I gave a presentation about using the computers, and then there are a lot of other ideas for the whole community to get involved with. So the kids kind of swarmed to these computers, and they were playing like Tux Math. It's it's an open source game for learning math, and a lot of other educational content on there. Just to kind of introduce them to the resources that the library offers. So another part of the trip was looking for where there is an internet connection. So right now, everything's self-contained at the library, but it doesn't actually have access to the internet, so you can't email or do anything really beyond just reading content and viewing content. So we hiked around a few of the villages that, one of the village at the top here is Carzelito. It's up on a hill. They have really good cell service. They just got electricity a few months ago, but it's only for one water pump that the engineering group is installing currently. So the joke last time we were down was that they have cell phone coverage, but they don't have a way to charge their phone, so they have to go down to El Rosario to charge it, but they can't use it because El Rosario is in a valley and there's no cell coverage there. And so this village didn't have clean water, so they have cell coverage, but no water, no electricity. So we're looking at areas where we could put a repeater, possibly to an internet connection that might be closer to the main road. And just kind of pictures of standard rush hour is dairy cattle coming back and some houses of what it looks like down there. To get up to Carzelito, we hiked through, it was pretty much a mahogany forest, so sort of jungle-like, really muddy, and going through some barbed wire fences. Our guide can't see his machete here, but he's cutting through most of the jungle to get up there. There is a road that goes up there as of last year, but he decided we should go through the jungle to get there, which was more fun. And then we went to sort of the main road outside of the village, and I'll show you where this is on a map in a moment, but there's an internet cafe. It's about 5 miles as a crow flies from Carzelito, the village where we're thinking about putting a repeater. And I've been there before, and we talked to the owner, or we talked to one of the workers that was there, and he directed us to the owner who installed this wireless network. And when we talked to the person that installed the network, he said he couldn't really expand it much further than it already was deployed. But there's another wireless ISP in the area, and he directed us towards that company. We ended up going to Euro, which is the nearest city, and talking to them a little bit more about what their plans are for expanding the network. So to expand the network, we would use the wireless repeaters to connect to the internet. And I'll just show a few maps of what we found. So hopefully this will show up on the Hangout. But this is a map of Honduras. I put this map together using some data I collected on my cell phone and then the Mapbox JavaScript API. So I parsed some of the data in an IPython library and put this all together. But this is just the basic area of where we're working. So when we fly into the airport and we stay outside of the city in a hotel, but then we drive kind of down and around the mountains to this area. So the main road, this is all paved, but then we go off the main road onto dirt roads, which is this dark line here, and we're staying at the Axe bunkhouse. And then these are other communities. So Carcelito, where we're thinking about putting the repeater, is up here. There's another community where Engineers Without Borders has done a water project called Chiguite. El Rosario is in this area. There are a few other towns. Engineers Without Borders has worked in, our first project was in Tecuan. And then there's Los Planes, which is an indigenous community of about 115 people. Every day there's this school bus that comes whipping through these dirt roads at about 7 in the morning, picking people up. And it goes through these roads and then out down to Euro, to the city. And at the end of the day, it comes back, and I think it's like $1 to take the bus into the city. But you have to watch out on the roads for the school bus coming through. There's also 2 cell towers that were recently installed in the area. So there's a Claro tower and a Tigo tower, and that's why there's such good cell service in Carcelito, but that also blocks the signal from getting into the valley where El Rosario is. And over here, this is where the internet cafe is. So the idea would be to connect from this area up to Carcelito and then down back into the valley for Rosario. And then from there, use some of the other hilltops to get to the other communities in the future. What we found was the company that has a wireless ISP, this is their coverage area, their map. So they have coverage in Euro, and it kind of extends out to what makes sense is the internet cafe that we used. But from when we talked to them, they said they're planning on expanding down into this area in La Habana in the next year or so, but apparently they also said that last year. So it's something that we're gonna have to work with them in the future on. And then some of the other information that I collected was just the GSM signal strength. So kind of the faster signal speeds kind of stop and don't really get into the area that we're working in. But the slower speeds, so in this blue is a weak signal, red is an excellent signal, and kind of the orange is a moderate signal. So there's a fairly good edge network where we're staying, but it's still ridiculously slow by our standards. The wireless ISP that we talked to could provide, if they could get to this area, would provide like a 1.5 megabit connection for about $75 a month. So kind of expensive, but not totally unreasonable.
Did you get those data?
So this was all data collected from my cell phone. I was using an app to just get signal strength, and it would give which cell network you're connected to, which the cell tower ID, any of the neighbors and what their signal strength was. And so this is just signal strength and then what type of signal. So
So that data is only relevant to where you actually travel.
Right. Yep. But we were traveling in this area, and it kind of the signal stopped sort of along this ridge line, is what we noticed. It also I had a Claro SIM card. I didn't have a Tigo SIM card, so that's from this tower is the nearest tower, as opposed to this other one. So it'd be interesting to get some more information from other providers. So the doctors decided when I started working on this network to call it the Ethernet, and I wasn't too fond of the name just because of all the things that could go wrong with this, and I didn't want my name associated with it. And they decided on the last night to make me a nice sign to put in the library for after we left. So they painted this up, and then the doctor that had worked in Alaska is big on making snowshoes. So he kind of into a sort of snowshoe of sorts. And they hung this on the, they were leaving to just commemorate the network. But some of the concerns that I had and that we talked about with the community that I didn't really have great answers for were that device, the router and the Raspberry Pi are in a small wooden box with a few air holes, but not much more. And that room can get up to about 100 degrees already. So it's already putting off, it's really warm and it's putting off a lot of heat. So those are things that the heat I was concerned with, but then they asked if they should keep the door open, but a lot of dust would get into there. So heat and dust, they're worried about wasps, bugs too. And then I noticed like nothing is wired really properly in any of these buildings. So there's that concern. And then nothing's really being monitored at this point. So if the internet connection, we had that, we could monitor it remotely. But even better would be if we could teach them how to monitor their own network. So those are all areas for future work. So that's all I have for the general talk. There are more pictures of puppies afterwards, but figured I'd go with questions first.
What are the operating parameters for the Raspberry Pi and the router?
So the question about operating parameters for the Raspberry Pi and the router, we looked those up. It's the router, I think, can operate up to, I think it said operating temperature of about 120 degrees. And I'm not sure what the Raspberry Pi is. And they had, I forget what the humidity level was too. I think it was like 90%. But I mean, if it already gets to 100 degrees and it's putting off heat in that small box, I was a little concerned about it frying itself. The Raspberry Pi didn't get quite as warm as the router was getting. So hopefully it'll continue to work. So.
I'm trying very hard to find some software that I used to make signal coverage maps several years ago,
Oh yeah?
which might really, really be helpful for you because it takes into account the graphical maps
Oh,
that you
cool.
can produce.
Okay.
So I actually show you like where shadows and stuff will be.
Okay. All right.
It might help you plan where to actually put towers.
Yeah, definitely. I did use the book that I mentioned earlier had some stuff about planning networks and where to put different towers and using the topographic information. I did some of that for initial estimate of if we could go from the internet cafe up to Carlsito, and it looked reasonable, a reasonable connection. So that's about a 5-kilometer connection. So
what kind of equipment would you use to make a line of sight connection like that? Is there like off-the-shelf stuff?
yeah, so Ubiquity Networks. So one of the pictures actually in here. So this is kind of one of the antennas that I was thinking that we could use. It's basically just a dish antenna. They make different kinds and different reflectors. And I mean, they're actually fairly cheap. Like I think an antenna like this was about $100.
And is it literally like plug and play with Ethernet and it's going to appear on the other side of this Ethernet? Or?
Pretty much. It's yeah. So there, a lot of them are power over Ethernet. So you can just plug it into a router. If it has an like IP address out there, pick it up on the other side. And from what I understand, I mean, I haven't actually done this, but I don't know. I don't know if Liam has any experience. You've worked with that kind of, not the wireless stuff, but
There's
the.
two microwave
Yeah.
It's just pretty cheap. So, I feel like $50. Yeah, off the shelf.
Yeah.
I think, so I went to WPI, they did, and I think microwave to the fraternity houses, because WPI is situated on a hill. It's a provided access to provided, but I have no idea how much that costs. Cheap, fast,
Yeah, but when you say cheap, I mean,
cheap to,
a couple $1,000 or, you know, $100.
I think you could do stuff's like 1,000, probably
Yeah.
2,000.
I know they make one, it's like a gigabit connection, and it was like a $3,000 per side, but it was the latest and greatest one that they've made. So.
and what's the power like in that village? Like I said, mostly on, is it like?
So the power, there were a few times when we were doing the demo where the power cut out. So it's fairly regularly, 3 or 4 of the days that I was actually trying to use the power, it wasn't there for a few hours. On the last trip, there was a good 6-hour segment, like 2 or 3 of the days where the power was out. So it's not incredibly reliable. One of the things that we installed with all this was a UPS for the network, just the router and the Raspberry Pi. But it's not that reliable at all. And in Carzalito, where we were thinking about putting a repeater, they only have one electrical connection, and that's specifically for their water pump. They don't have anything else, and this wouldn't actually be near the water pump, so we'd have to install all of that or use some sort of solar battery backup system for everything. So it's things that we're considering, or I'm considering. If anyone wants to help, feel free to.
Is this 110?
Yeah. So it's all, they use US standards
So
for
it's all
everything.
110,
Yep.
60 hertz stuff?
Yeah. There are definitely spikes pretty often. One of the days we woke up and the doctor that was giving the presentation on ice, his computer wouldn't start, and it kind of seemed like the power supply was fried on it. I ended up taking the whole thing apart and getting the hard drive out and sticking it into one of my computers to recover his presentation, putting that on a flash drive for him. But then later when I put the hard drive back in, it started to work again. So we thought maybe it was fried, but I'm not really sure what that was. But after that, people were very concerned about plugging things into the wall. A lot of the medical equipment is plugged in through a voltage regulator because they're concerned about damage. So
The doctor let you operate on his laptop without a license?
yeah, well, he was doing medical screenings and everything in the next room, and I was taking apart his computer. It was fun. All right, so these are the bunkhouse dogs that stayed with us. This is Tatiana, and this is actually one of her puppies. We named Lishi for little, well, probably shouldn't say this on air, but Lishi. And there's another one that we named Yahoo, and they would all, a few of us were feeding them some of our scraps, so they were getting a lot of beans and rice and tortillas. And then we were going to stop, but then we realized that Tatiana had puppies, and she was actually going back and like throwing up her food and letting the little puppies eat it. So then we decided we'd keep feeding her for the rest of the few weeks. But we did end up kicking them out a few nights because this one, Lishi, liked to bark, and we're under like one big metal roof, so it just echoes all night long. So anytime a cow were by, this thing would start barking everywhere. But other than that, she was pretty cute. And every morning we found them like in a better and better spot. So like each morning, the first few mornings, they were in front of the door to our bunkhouse. And then we found, Tatiana had found one of the dental chairs that we had left outside, and she slept in that all night. And then she found the picnic table. And then we ended up putting down a mat, and she ended up sleeping on that on the picnic table most nights until we kicked them out. This is Tatiana's puppies. So these guys were hanging out pretty often. And there was one day when everyone was just hanging out, sleeping in the area. So there's a puppy pile here of all our puppies, and then Tatiana and Lishi sleeping on their mat. So with that, that's all I have. Thanks everyone for coming. And if you want to get involved, feel free to let me know, and we can start working on this. Thanks.
Yay, puppies.